Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Now, the Prime Minister has today denied that the UK is climbing down over leaving the customs union. This follows a report in the Daily Telegraph claiming that ministers have agreed as a last resort to remain tied to the customs union beyond the end of the transition period. Speaking to the media at an EU summit in Bulgaria this morning, the Prime Minister emphasised that the country would be leaving it along with the rest of the EU.
The United Kingdom will be leaving the customs union as we're leaving the European Union. Of course, we will be negotiating future customs arrangements with the European Union, and I've set 3 objectives. The government has 3 objectives in those. We need to be able to have our own independent trade policy. We want as frictionless a border between the UK and the EU so that trade can continue, and we want to ensure that there's no hard border between Northern Ireland and Ireland.
Theresa May. Well, joining me now is Steve Swinford from the Daily Telegraph, who had the splash on the front of his paper today. So just give us more detail about the story, Steve.
Joe, I'm delighted to be here. What we learned was that on Tuesday, the Brexit War Cabinet agreed to what's called an Irish backstop, which means that as a very last resort, if all of the plans are not in place, we would essentially keep a customs arrangement with the EU in which we'd be tied to the customs union effectively, would be aligned to it. So the government is today formally denying that we will be in the customs union, but that doesn't mean that we won't still be tied to a lot of it, and it's really upset Brexiteers, the prospect of that.
Right, oh yeah, but it won't surprise you obviously that this has been denied, that nothing has changed, that Theresa May, as we just heard there, is saying that we will leave the customs union when we leave the EU. Is it also the case, as you wrote, that Boris Johnson, Michael Gove were outgunned at that meeting, that they in the end reluctantly agreed and signed up to this idea because Brexiteer influence is waning in the cabinet?
That's correct. They essentially swallowed the idea. They raised strong objections in the meeting, but it wasn't ultimately a resigning issue. No one's quitting the cabinet and no one's leaving the government. There are still big fights to have over what our customs arrangement with the European Union looks like after Brexit. They want to be there for those fights. So they've reluctantly agreed to it, even though they don't like it.
Right, but isn't the point, though, that to some extent, Theresa May is right in saying that we will leave the customs union and the single market when we leave the EU. It's just the mechanism by which we do that still needs to be agreed. And so the backstop, as it is only in play until that mechanism has been decided upon, whether it's the maximum facilitation and technology that deals with this frictionless border or whether we have some sort of customs partnership.
That's exactly right, and Downing Street's argument is that they can have their customs solution, whether it's a customs partnership or MaxFAC as it's known, or something in between, and they can have that already by the time the transition period ends, December 2021. But officials are sceptical. They think it will take a lot longer to get ready, and that actually we need a bridge, we need a way out of that in case things aren't in place. So we could end up in a position where we are still technically tied to the customs union and have to follow a lot of its rules and possibly even end up paying money into the European Union still. It's not clear yet how that process will work.
All right, Steve, thanks very much for joining us. Here in the studio is the Brexit supporting Conservative MP Bill Cash.
Hello.
Hello.
Yeah.
Bill, disappointment for you then. Your colleagues in Canada have lost the argument.
No, because we've just heard from Stephen what he's said, and I think he's right. We've just heard from the Prime Minister too, but there is another factor which hasn't yet been mentioned, and that is that this backstop is part of a draft agreement that was prepared as a result of a meeting on the 8th of December last year. We've heard Coveney refer to it, Varadkar and all the rest of it.
Let's just explain what that backstop is.
Yes.
Tell the viewers exactly what it means.
Well, what it means is that there is a final option C, which they say would mean that we would have to fit in with the regulatory alignment of the customs union in relation to the Irish north and south.
In order to keep it frictionless.
In order to keep it frictionless.
Right.
However, the fact is that that agreement is not a legally binding document. It is not yet part of the withdrawal agreement.
Right.
And it is, I mean, we had a meeting yesterday with Karen Bradley, the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, in front of my committee, the European Scrutiny Committee, and we went into all this. And the plain fact is that it is not binding. And it may be that there are people talking about it, but it is not a binding agreement.
Right, but the fact that it's not
so
binding...
option C is not actually binding on the United Kingdom.
But it is an option, isn't it, Bill Cash?
It's something that's being talked about, but nothing is agreed until everything is agreed.
No, but it is an option. And it's an option that you don't support, and nor do many of you...
I certainly don't.
Right.
No, I don't like the idea, but the fact is that what is an idea is not necessarily an obligation.
Right.
And there is no obligation. There are loads of things, Joe, that are being discussed at the moment with contrary views as to whether they're good ideas or not. The question is what will actually happen.
Yes.
And that will be decided by a legal obligation in an agreement.
Right, well, let's talk about what might
Okay.
happen. Everybody says they want a frictionless border.
Yes.
Everybody says
And
there
no
must be
hard
no
border.
hard
No
infrastructure.
hard border.
Oh, we've heard
We've
it.
heard it over and over
Yeah,
again.
exactly.
3 cheers.
The problem is that neither of the potential solutions, the customs partnership, which you don't support, and the maximum facilitation, which everybody says at the moment is not possible.
Well,
Might be.
everybody.
Hang on, let me just
Wait a
finish.
minute. No.
Let me finish. It's not
Everybody?
possible. So the EU, many people in your party, many people across Parliament. If it's not ready, let's imagine that there is a technical. Let's imagine there's a technical solution, and it's not ready by 2020, but it's ready by 2023. So are you prepared to stay in the customs union till then?
Can I just make the point about the money, which Stephen
answer
because
that question.
if we stay in after the 30th of December 2020, in other words, on the 1st of January 2021,
yes.
a huge bill, which I've already pointed out from the European Scrutiny Committee, will mean another £5 billion.
Right, but that's not the answer to my question. Would you be prepared to do that?
Well, the short answer is I certainly don't want to, but this is an objective which is currently being discussed. We're in the business of ideas, not legal obligations at the moment. I can't make myself... We must not give in to ultimatums from Tusk, Barnier, Varadkar, Coveney. That's what they're doing.
And Remainer Tory MPs?
I'm talking... yes, that could also apply.
Right. What's Labour's position? Not really that much clearer, is it?
Well, Labour have said that they would want to stay in some customs union. I mean, I think what the Prime Minister is proposing, whether it's sort of a full plan or being talked about, is broadly sensible. I mean, if you're going to have an extended period, I mean, why wouldn't you use that on a pragmatic basis? I mean,
you might never get out of it.
Well, I mean, do you know how you see it, Bill? It's almost like we're running up to the cliff edge, but we're giving ourselves a longer run-up period.
Actually, it's like an escalator. You get on the first steps and you can get off,
but,
and after that you can't.
I think we cannot underestimate the Northern Ireland situation. I think we here in London gloss over it quite lightly. So it's something can be sorted. I mean, I was in Belfast just last week, and people are raging about it. It is an issue. And we are playing with their lives and their future, the strength of the Good Friday Agreement as well.
There's a great deal of
well,
disinformation
I think people in Northern Ireland do know what they're talking about with the greatest of respect.
Well, I'm talking to Northern Ireland people as well, and I have to also say that yesterday in the committee proceedings, we went into this, it was in public, it was on television, it's been seen by people, and the fact is that all this talk about cameras, there are cameras there already, round the
You know what, Bill, that is not how people are feeling
I
don't want to intrude
in Northern Ireland right now.
From an outsider's perspective, Jordan, are you a spiritual Brexiteer?
I have some sympathy with people's desire to disentangle themselves from rulers who are too far away in the power hierarchy from them.
What a good point.
Why?
Well, because as people move away from you up hierarchies, it's harder and harder for them to represent you properly at a local level. And I also have a tremendous amount of faith, I would say, all things considered, in the people of the UK to muddle through properly, because they've been doing that for a very, very long time.
Yeah.
So, you know, I'd bet, my sense as a Canadian is that I'd bet on Britain.
All right.
But I appreciate that, but that's a kind of nice platitudinous sort of statement, because we've got, you know, we've had a huge period of austerity. People are really struggling in parts of the country now. We've had a wage freeze.
4.3% unemployment.
We've had a wage freeze in this country. We're in a cost of living crisis. We haven't got enough money for our schools, for our hospitals. You know, the economy does matter. Nobody voted to be poor. It's all very well giving the patriotic language of freeing yourself, but nobody...
4.2% unemployment.
Right, and on that, before this takes over the whole programme, I'm sorry, Bill Cash,
Joe, very
we have
nice
to
to
let
see
you
you
go.
again.
You need to leave.
I have to go indeed.
So, for more reporting and analysis of Brexit, check out the BBC News website. If you haven't done already, I must say it on a daily basis. That's bbc.co.uk/Brexit.
Now, the thorny question of the Irish border after Brexit was on the agenda when the Prime Minister met the Irish Taoiseach at a summit today. Mr Varadkar warned that a possible Brexit deal could collapse if Britain doesn't say how it plans to keep the border open. And if a collapse led to a hard Brexit, well, the outcome could be Ireland could be even more unexpected than something that people had thought of after Brexit. Now, Channel 4 News has learned that some respected figures from the liberal wing of unionism are now ready to talk with the government in Dublin about Irish unity and even a border poll. Our political editor, Gary Gibbon, has been finding out more.
A band rehearsal in County Down for the summer marching season. Save for the shoes, perhaps, all looks like it might have done for decades. But could the summer of 2016, the EU referendum, the vote for Brexit, change old certainties in Northern Ireland? Theresa May recently pointed Jacob Rees-Mogg to an opinion poll which showed, though there's a majority right now still for the union here, that could change. It suggested the margin of victory would be much narrower if there was a hard Brexit, which some in Northern Ireland thought harmed the province. Talking to sources in Number 10, in the Irish government and even in the DUP about what's happening in Northern Ireland opinion, you hear phrases like shifting plates and creaking glaciers.
It's ideas that are being floated that were beyond consideration before and certainly wouldn't have been entertained by anyone, including myself, in unionism.
Ian Marshall farms in South Armagh. He was president of the Ulster Farmers' Union, a bastion of unionism. Are people you know in the unionist family now thinking the unthinkable?
Yeah, some are thinking now the unthinkable. I think the demographics have changed, circumstances are different, and I think, you know, when we look to the future, then we have to be mindful of what's gone before and what the opportunities are, and if that resonates with all of the people of Northern Ireland, and if that sits comfortably, then possibly, as you refer to, the unthinkable, you know, people are starting to bear that in mind.
And you're one of those people?
Yeah, I'm a realist, I'm a pragmatist.
Ian Marshall has just been elected as a Northern Ireland voice in the Irish Senate. Professor James Dornan is an obstetrician, gynaecologist and lecturer. He's also from a unionist background.
I would traditionally be thought of as being quite happy with the union, and I have been. It's been very good to me, the union, educationally and health-wise and everything else in my life. But it's not so much as that I'm thinking the unthinkable. I think everything is on the table at the present.
Including, he thinks, a border poll.
The Unionist, Labour and Alliance parties have urged their supporters to vote to stay with Britain.
The last one in 1973 was boycotted by the nationalist community. The nation was not glued to the results ticker. Professor Dornan says there are already informal talks happening, exploring what kind of united Ireland should be on offer next time. He thinks that could come soon. You think a border poll could happen as soon as 2022?
No doubt that it could happen by 2022.
And could be a vote against the union?
Well, I think it could be. I'd love to see against the union as we have at the moment. And there's a lot of people nowadays, and not just me, who are saying, you know what, if somebody offers me a better deal and somebody offers me a good deal, then I would go for it.
Are there any signs of conversations at a senior level that there is any kind of plan being worked out? Is there a back channel?
I'm absolutely sure.
You think that's going on now?
That is going on now.
People in Belfast, people in Dublin, at senior levels, discussing what a united Ireland, Union of Ireland, might look like?
I think that's definitely going on day and daily.
And how high up are we talking?
I think at every level. I mean, I have...
Close to the highest level?
Absolutely, at the highest level.
A cross-community Irish dancing class in East Belfast. Those of a Protestant background outnumbered the Catholic community tonight. Everyone in Northern Ireland knows the wider demographics are going the other way. Nationalists could outnumber Unionists here by the next census in 3 years' time.
In the past, a huge chunk of the Catholic population has actually been a bit wary of the idea of United Ireland and has wanted to hold on to the perks of the UK, like the NHS and the welfare state. Is that now changing?
I was not somebody who was beating the table for a United Ireland. I was not somebody who was particularly interested in a United Ireland unless it could be sold to 1 million other people and therefore be workable. And then something happened in me after the vote on Brexit, and I found it was happening in friends as well. We were really quite shocked by it. We were really quite stunned. The way I feel and the way my friends and neighbours felt when we spoke after the Brexit vote was we felt fundamentally insulted. And people who had not been supporting the IRA and who had not been particularly anxious about a United Ireland were now saying, maybe that's where we're going after all.
We gathered some younger voters at Queen's University Belfast. Those with a Catholic background said something was changing.
It's no longer a pipe dream now, and everybody recognises that. We've seen that through the discourse of politics that we've had right now. Even Theresa May has decided to recognise it, which is most bizarre and all of that.
I've always believed in a United Ireland culturally and socially and politically. It's something that I've always aspired to. But when I woke up on the 24th of June, it was the first time that I actually thought, OK, I see the path to this.
Brexit just changed it.
It absolutely changed it.
Not all the unionists in our group were convinced.
I don't think the conversation has changed at all in the unionist community. I would say it's been like a ripple in the water. Perhaps the thought has entered their head and then it has left it soon after.
I don't think it's really changed.
You think people in the unionist community still have the same fears?
Yeah, I still think so.
Very much alive?
Yeah, especially towards older people as well.
In my father's generation, there was never, we come from East Belfast, a very working class area, and there was never really a thought that in his lifetime he would see a border poll, no less a United Ireland. I think in my lifetime that's a credible possibility.
Floating across the symbols of East Belfast loyalism, an evening class for Irish singing. And its cross-community. Are most people here from the nearby streets?
Prod. See the way all the takes
Does this speak of something else that could happen in Northern Ireland? The fact that you're here together. What about actually uniting in one country?
You'll have to ask, Linda.
Even in a room like this, an awkward moment.
Oh no, we're on the sticky ground.
We're on the sticky ground now.
That's going a bit far.
Well, I mean, as far as we're concerned, there are people here who have different aspirations, and that's fine.
In retirement, 20 years on from the Good Friday Agreement, one of its architects has this advice for those who want a border poll soon.
Make haste slowly. The reality is that we have in a uniquely complex situation, and to try and barnstorm it with a poll of that nature in a short period of time without doing the groundwork could be very dangerous indeed. We would be doing to the unionists what was done to us, and they would feel exactly the same as we felt for so long, and there would be the danger of violence coming from that.
Hello. I can hear feet going in that time of mine. Please.
Brexit, already weighing down Theresa May and Leo Varadkar's in-trays, has stirred an old debate of enormous potency, bringing it to life earlier than just about anyone had expected. Gary Gibbon, Channel 4 News, Belfast.
Well, earlier I spoke to Jonathan Powell, who was Tony Blair's Chief of Staff and the government's chief negotiator in Northern Ireland from 1997 to 2007. I began by asking him how significant the meeting really was.
Well, I do think that the Brexit decision has roiled opinion in Northern Ireland. You now hear middle-class Protestants in golf clubs and tennis clubs and rugby clubs talking about maybe we'd be better off in a united Ireland if that's going to remain in the EU. So opinion is beginning to be affected by it, but I wouldn't want to exaggerate too much.
At what stage do politicians in Northern Ireland get involved in this conversation? Protestant politicians?
Well, of course, the only politicians we have from Northern Ireland in Westminster now are the DUP. Sinn Féin don't take their seats, and the moderate parties didn't win any seats at the last election. So the only voice we really hear in London is the DUP.
And you don't see them taking part in this conversation?
No, but you will find, well, you'll find some of their supporters are. If you think of the DUP voters along the border who are farmers, who would be very badly affected by a hard Brexit, they feel very strongly about it. And you'll notice that the DUP have made it clear they are not against staying in a customs union if it comes to that. It's not a red line, they have said. So they're prepared to stay in the customs union in order to avoid a hard border. So
are we moving closer to a border poll, to a referendum at some stage on Irish unity?
Well, the point of the Good Friday Agreement was consent. In other words, you had to have a majority of people wanting to stay in the United Kingdom to remain in the United Kingdom, a majority to join a united Ireland. I don't think we've got to the stage where there's going to be a majority for being in a united Ireland. I don't think the numbers are there.
And how would you organise? I'm just imagining in the future, how would you organise such a poll? It couldn't be 50+1, could it? It'd have to be more than that.
Well, that's the problem. If you, as we discovered with Brexit, if you decide to go for hard Brexit on the back of a 52-48 split, we've seen the problems in terms of dividing opinion in this country. If you do that in Northern Ireland, where the whole issue is much more visceral, the consequence would be a lot more serious.
I mean, how do you feel personally about all this?
Well, I spent 10 years of my life working on the Good Friday Agreement and its implementation, and it took a very long time to get it implemented, to get the institutions up and running. And we have to remember, we have a political crisis in Northern Ireland already. The executive has not been in place for over a year, so we already have a crisis. And then this issue of Brexit compounds that, brings it all to the surface and makes it all worse again. Now, the British government is committed to avoiding a hard border. Theresa May has said she will not have a hard border, so it will not be hard Brexit from that point of view. And if she delivers on that, and I think the Irish government and the EU will insist on that, then many of these problems fade away.
Can you see any obvious solutions at the moment that keep everyone happy?
Well, the only solution I can see is one that Leo Varadkar, the Irish Taoiseach, has suggested today Theresa May is moving towards. He said that she'll make a new announcement in the next several weeks, which will be effectively staying in the customs union. It will be called something different. If you stay in the customs union, whatever you call it, that will go a long way to solving the problem.
But it won't keep the Brexiteers happy?
It will make the Brexiteers very unhappy.
Could split the party?
It could indeed.
Just finally, if this conversation continues between Protestants in Northern Ireland and the government in Dublin about some sort of border poll at the end of the day, a referendum on unity, just the mere talk of this is politically very explosive, isn't it? It
is very unsettling. We've seen the dissident Republicans using Brexit as a reason to gather support and to make threats of what they will do to the British state. And we've seen the loyalists saying they need to stay in existence to protect Northern Ireland's place in the British state. So it's again bringing up these voices from the paramilitaries we thought we weren't going to be hearing again. So it does have that impact.
Jonathan Powell, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Well, our political correspondent Michael Clarke joins me now from Westminster. Michael, this is a bit of a mess, isn't it?
Well, a mess, but with developments, as you were hearing there from Jonathan Powell. Theresa May was meeting EU leaders in Bulgaria today, and she told Presidents Juncker and Tusk that Britain will shortly be putting forward proposals for a backstop arrangement on customs. Now, this backstop was agreed by the Cabinet Subcommittee on Tuesday, contrary to the objections of Michael Gove and Boris Johnson. And basically, as Jonathan Powell outlined, what they're talking about is that Britain would remain aligned with the EU customs union beyond the end of the transition period, beyond 2020, pending, of course, some more permanent arrangement. That's likely to keep the Irish government happy because it would mean no hard border between North and South, likely to keep the DUP reasonably happy because it would mean no customs checks down the Irish Sea, but Brexiteers on the mainland less happy because they'll say that what's being presented as something temporary will end up being permanent, and we will end up with Brexit in name only.
Michael Clarke, thank you very much.
All this week, Newsnight has been bringing you a series of special reports on Brexit and the Irish border. In a moment, we'll conclude our coverage with an examination of what Brexit could mean for the people of the border town of Strabane. But first, we're going to briefly return to the thorny issue of customs arrangements and cameras potentially being deployed at border crossing points. This is what Northern Ireland's most senior policeman told us earlier this week.
I think the uncertainty around Brexit and the border, is a concern, certainly from a policing perspective. We wouldn't want to see anything that looks like physical infrastructure at the border, primarily because we assess that could symbolically become the focus of attention and targeting by violent dissident Republican groups.
And our political editor, Nick Watt, is here with more on this. Nick.
Yes, well, following those remarks by George Hamilton, the Northern Ireland Secretary Karen Bradley said yesterday there would be no new cameras on the border, no new infrastructure, and she cited security concerns. Now, I've learnt the calculations that have informed her and indeed George Hamilton's thinking, and this is that the Secretary of State has been told that there would need to be an additional 1,000 or more police officers just to police any extra, the most minimal level of extra infrastructure involving cameras. And that is because they would obviously be targets on the border. Now, we put this to the Police Service of Northern Ireland, and this is what Assistant Chief Constable Stephen Martin said. He said, PSNI has not proposed any figure to the Secretary of State. Whilst it's likely that we will require additional resources, we are currently assessing the potential implications of Brexit and developing options. So, confirmation there of additional resources. On that point about not putting any figures on the table, as I understand it, it is a scoping exercise. So, obviously, you're not going to have formal figures just at the moment.
Nick, thank you very much indeed. And now, how will Brexit affect the people in the border town of Strabane? The documentary maker Peter Taylor was reporting from there 44 years ago during the Troubles. Now, as the question of what to do about the Irish border reaches crunch time, he's been back to Strabane.
A lot of people have moved on from the 1970s. They don't want to go back to the bombings and shootings. People don't want that anymore. People at the town of Strabane, to me, have had enough of that.
The Irish government, who are clamouring for no return to the hard border and stirring up fears that there may be a hard border.
We've come a long, long way. There's still a road to go, and I would hate to see Brexit putting us back on our knees.
Strabane is a small border town at the very edge of the United Kingdom. The Irish Republic is on the other side of the river.
Three weeks ago, a bread van was hijacked and parked here in Strabane's main street. There was a bomb in the back of it, and when it exploded, it destroyed McGoldrick's the grocers and McKee's the insurance brokers, McGuinness's the opticians and Gray's the printers, McGrory's the drapers and Divine's supermarket. It also smashed Deary's windows for the 14th time.
I first went to Strabane nearly 45 years ago in 1974, one of the bloodiest years of the conflict. The town is mainly nationalist and had been reduced to rubble by the IRA.
That was bombed a few times, but it survived. And that would have been a bomb site too, just when you were here last, that next door where Nero was.
This was?
It was the cinema, the Commodore cinema.
I remember the big sign saying Commodore. That was about all that was left. But it's taken a long time to build it back up, hasn't it?
Still building yet, we're not there yet. I suppose because we were so close to the army monitored border, it probably wasn't a good spot for investment. So because that's all gone now and the troubles seem to be over us, people are investing on the town now, so that's a good sign in a way.
To what extent would Brexit threaten all this economic development?
I'm hoping that it won't affect it too much, but if I'm being realistic, it probably will. We get a lot of cross-border traffic here, and if they were to put up a hard border again, it would drive us back to the old days.
1974, we were filming at an army checkpoint at the border when it came under attack. It was an almost daily occurrence.
What? Green t-shirt, yeah, grey slacks, about 16 years old, and he's got an Armalite.
These were the days of the hard border and the target it presented. The Drumralla estate on the outskirts of Strabane was a notorious IRA stronghold. One of its volunteers, Eugene Devlin, was shot dead by the British Army.
So this is where my father and the other man were coming across with guns, and both of them got ambushed then by the British soldiers, and this is the spot that he died on then.
Eugene had been living in America with his wife and, not wishing to fight in Vietnam, had returned to Strabane to fight. I interviewed his widow Carmel in 1974.
Well, when I came back from America, I was pregnant, and Eugene already had his mind made up about the provisionals, joining them, like. So me and him talked about it, like. I told him I was worried about where the baby was concerned. So he says, well, that's why I'm doing this. I want a better future for the baby.
And the baby was you?
Yeah, it was me. Well, that was actually very bittersweet for me, as my mother passed away 25 years ago in my life. I've never ever seen it before, so it was nice.
Did you make a better country for it?
Well, at the time of me growing up, nothing much had changed. But now with my own children, it is a lot better. It really is a lot better. He mightn't have made it better for me at that time, but he's made it better for his grandchildren, which is a good thing.
This is Martin Gallen's day job. Besides being president of the Strabane Chamber of Commerce, he makes uilleann pipes entirely on his own.
The Strabane you saw in 1974 wasn't a nice place. The people are the same. People are still the same, resilient, bulletproof people that no matter what's thrown at them, they'll get up and go about their business. But the town, there was no investment, there were very few jobs. The place was bleak, a very big place, and now it's pretty hopeful looking. We've come a long, long way. There's still a road to go, and I would hate to see Brexit putting us back on our knees to that stage that we were at then.
Many unionists live in outlying villages like Castle Derg. Many have been murdered by the IRA, in particular those who were members of the police and the UDR. Some belonged to the band.
Those memorials represent 4 members of this band who were murdered by the IRA. Many victims don't have memorials other than their own headstones.
Roughly how many victims are there from within your community around here?
There are around 30 victims of IRA terrorism in this area. People really want to pursue justice for their loved ones because they feel they have been left behind by the whole political process over the last 2 decades.
Brexit has rekindled memories of a dangerous and divisive hard border. So we're now
on Donegal.
In the Irish Republic.
Yep, simple as that.
So we've now crossed the border. And there's no sign that we have crossed the border, is there?
It's just as easy as what you've just seen. No checkpoints, no anything at all. There would have been a customs point up here too.
The prospect of new controls haunts Martin Gallen.
Because my work crosses the border so many times, if I'm hit with a tariff, each time I cross the border, then I have two options. I can either raise my prices or move all my operations over the border. I'll have no option, I'll just have to up sticks, head for the hills.
Contingency plans are also being made by the biggest employer in Strabane, O'Neill's, Ireland's largest manufacturer of Gaelic football shirts. The factory employs over 600 workers. Half of them commute from across the border in Donegal.
If there's a hard border and there's duties and tariffs, that could have a major impact on our bottom line, because our garments and our fabrics can cross the border up to 8 times. So if there was duties and tariffs, it just would be a major disaster for us. We do have a plan B. We have an option to buy 5 acres of land from Donegal County Council. It's only a mile from where we're standing at the moment. And, you know, if there was a major problem, we would have to look at relocating most of our operations there.
Kieran Kennedy, like most other businesses in Northern Ireland, is waiting for a decision from the government.
Well, to me, there's only one, answer to it, and that's for Northern Ireland and maybe the rest of the UK to remain within the customs union and the single market. Like, I don't think there's any other ways around it, and that's what we need, and we need to avoid at all costs a hard border.
On the site of the old border checkpoint now stands a sculpture to peace. Another option is to give the North special status, with Northern Ireland remaining part of the customs union, whilst the rest of the UK does not. I put this to the DUP leader, Arlene Foster.
No, it's not acceptable at all. For us, it's not just about the constitutional position of Northern Ireland within the Union. It's also about the economic position of Northern Ireland, and it would be economically catastrophic if we had a border down the Irish Sea, which is what was being talked about in terms of Northern Ireland staying within the customs union and the rest of the UK leaving.
Although all sides of the argument insist there will be no hard border, the possibility of there being some kind of infrastructure cannot be ruled out. The stakes are high. The devastation Strabane suffered during the Troubles is a dire warning.
So far, almost 1,000 people have died in the Troubles of Northern Ireland, and there'll be more.
After I made that film almost 45 years ago, I watched the death toll climb to over 3,600. The fear is that Brexit could unravel all that has been achieved and consign Northern Ireland and Strabane to the dark days of the past.
Peter Taylor, well, that's all we have time for.